Long before Julius Caesar became a name spoken with awe across the Mediterranean, long before he marched legions, crossed rivers, or broke the political spine of the Roman Republic, he faced a moment that could easily have ended his life before his ambitions ever took shape. He was still a young man, not yet hardened by war or polished by high office, when the dictator Lucius Cornelius Sulla turned his gaze toward him. Sulla was a man whose name alone inspired dread. He had seized control of Rome through force, executed thousands through his infamous proscriptions, and ruled not by consensus but by the shadow of death. To live under his regime was to live under a constant reminder that loyalty was demanded. Dissent was fatal, and obedience was not optional. And yet, in this arena of terror, Caesar made a choice so bold, so improbable, that even Sulla himself later admitted he had nearly allowed a dangerous man to slip through his grasp. At the center of the conflict was Cornelia, Caesar's young wife, the daughter of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a powerful figure aligned with Marius, Sulla's sworn enemy. Their marriage had been political as much as personal, but Caesar, unlike many men of his rank, felt genuine loyalty to his wife. When Sulla returned to Rome and purged the Marian faction, he demanded that Caesar annul the marriage. To Sulla, this was not a personal matter, it was a test of allegiance. A man who clung to Marian connections could not be trusted. Most nobles in Caesar's position would have bowed immediately, signing away their marriage and expressing gratitude for being spared the dictator's wrath. But Caesar refused. Plainly, firmly, without tremor or apology, he said no. The refusal was more than audacity, it was near suicidal defiance. Sulla controlled the legions, the courts, the treasury, and the very streets of Rome. A man could be executed simply because Sulla considered him troublesome. Caesar understood this well. His uncle Marius was dead. His father-in-law had died in the chaos. His own name placed him on the margins of a faction Sulla wanted wiped away from Roman memory. And yet he chose loyalty to Cornelia over submission to absolute power, displaying a stubbornness that stunned even his closest relatives. When word of his decision spread, many assumed it meant his immediate execution. Sulla issued orders to seize Caesar's property, strip him of his priestly office as Flamen Dialis, and hunt him down. The young nobleman fled Rome, moving from one hiding place to another, seeking refuge in the countryside, often protected only by the loyalty of distant family allies. He lived for a time like a fugitive, constantly aware that a small patrol might stumble upon him and end his life with a single sword stroke. There were moments in which his survival depended on bribery. He was forced to pay off soldiers sent to capture him, convincing them to look the other way for enough gold to feed their families for months. Caesar had not yet become the master of legions. At this point he was simply a young man with a famous name, a dangerous network of relatives, and a will strong enough to resist Rome's most frightening dictator. What saved him was not compromise but intervention. As days passed and Sulla's anger simmered, influential figures began to plead on Caesar's behalf. His mother's family petitioned the dictator. Powerful priests and magistrates, including the Vestal Virgins, whose voices carried spiritual authority even Sulla respected, urged mercy. At first Sulla resisted. The boy was too proud, too tied to the wrong lineage, too bold for his own good. But gradually, under repeated pressure, he relented. Even so, he did not do so without a warning that would echo through history. He is said to have muttered, perhaps in resignation, perhaps in recognition, that in sparing Caesar he was sparing not a harmless youth but potentially a threat greater than any he had yet faced. In this Caesar, he reportedly said, there are many Mariuses. It was a prophecy spoken by the very man who tried hardest to extinguish the embers of the Marian cause. Once the danger passed, Caesar returned to Rome but not unchanged. The episode revealed several of the traits that would define him throughout his life: a rigid loyalty to those he considered his own. An unbending pride in the face of authority, and a willingness to stake everything, status, wealth, and even life, on principle when he believed principle demanded it. But even more revealing was how he maneuvered through the crisis. He refused the dictator's demand, fled when it became necessary, leveraged alliances, bribed when forced, and survived through a mixture of courage and tactical flexibility. The blend of idealism and pragmatism he demonstrated became one of his trademarks, allowing him later to charm enemies, outmaneuver rivals, and turn collapsing situations into stepping stones. To a Roman audience of the late Republic, the story carried a powerful message. In a world where political marriages were broken like contracts and loyalty shifted with convenience, Caesar had clung to Cornelia at enormous personal risk. It marked him not as reckless but as uncommonly steadfast. His refusal to yield hinted at the resolve that would later drive him through military hardships, political conspiracies, and betrayal. This episode also offered Rome an early glimpse of the future, a man who would challenge dictators, who would carve out new forms of power, who would never bow to the demands of others when those demands collided with his sense of dignity and destiny. Cornelia herself died young, long before Caesar reached the height of his influence, yet the choice he made for her defined one of the earliest milestones in his ascent. It proved that even when he possessed little more than a name and ambition, he carried the inner fire of someone who could stand against the machinery of the state and survive. Sulla's attempt to force him into submission inadvertently became the crucible in which Caesar's self-image was tempered. The young aristocrat who risked everything rather than abandon his wife would one day become the leader who crossed forbidden borders, confronted senatorial decrees, and reshaped the ancient world through the sheer force of will. Thus the episode stands as one of the earliest demonstrations of the character that would one day reshape Rome. It was a moment when a young but already formidable Julius Caesar measured himself against absolute authority, refused to yield, and emerged alive, changed, sharpened, and carrying within him the conviction that destiny favored those who dared to defy the impossible.